From Lagos, the nation's commercial capital, this is the News at 10. Live from Channels Television. Reporting tonight, Amarachi Ubani.
Good evening and welcome. Tonight, economy tops President Muhammadu Buhari's priorities, asks National Assembly to approve $5.5 billion external loan to finance the 2020 budget. Effects of COVID-19 bites harder as President Muhammadu Buhari renews call for debt cancellation for African countries at the United Nations high-level meeting. Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 cautions Nigerians against complacency as Kogi State government rejects test results of state index case. And coronavirus deaths in the United States passes over 100,000 in 4 months. Plus business, news from Abuja, the FCT, and later from our studios in London.
On business news, manufacturing PMI drops to 42.4 index points in May after 36 months of expansion, and that's due to slower growth in production and global economic lockdown.
On sports news tonight, the English Premier League season is set to resume on June 17th after a 3-month suspension, with Aston Villa at home to Sheffield United and Manchester City hosting Arsenal.
And from Abuja, Niger Delta Development Commission head office in Rivers shuts down operation temporarily following death of top management officer from COVID-19. Workers to be self-quarantined for 2 weeks.
President Muhammadu Buhari is seeking the approval of the National Assembly for an external loan of $5.513 billion. The loan is to finance the revised 2020 budget, priority projects of the federal government, and COVID-19 support for state governments. Our correspondent Linda Kigbe reports that the National Assembly has also passed the revised 2020 budget through second reading.
I wish to request the approval of the Senate of the Federal Government of Nigeria for external borrowing to finance the following.
Senate President Ahmed Lawan reading a letter from President Muhammadu Buhari requesting approval for an external loan of $5.513 billion. This request is coming almost 1 month after the President sought the approval of the National Assembly to borrow 850 billion naira internally. The loan to be sourced externally is to finance the revised 2020 budget, priority federal government projects to address the COVID-19 pandemic and improve Nigeria's food security, as well as support for state governments. The external loan is to come from mainly 4 sources: the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, African Development Bank, and Islamic Development Bank.
The Senate in a closed session.
The Senate President also reads a letter containing the revised 2020 budget and medium-term expenditure framework (MTEF), which President Buhari sent to the National Assembly. President Buhari in the letter explains that the amendment of a 2020 budget is necessary because of the sharp decline in oil prices and cut in oil production quota caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The upper chamber suspends its rules to give accelerated hearing to the 2020 budget, which is revised from 10.594 to 10.509 trillion naira.
COVID-19 intervention here is 213.5 billion. That again, if it is only for isolation centers and buying of ventilators, of course, what we have in basic health is 25 billion. Compared to the 213.5 billion going to COVID-19 intervention, the disparity is too huge.
Budgetary provision alone is not enough. We need stimulus package that will generate a lot of economic activities.
Thank you.
The bill passes second reading and is sent to the Committee on Finance to produce a report by Tuesday, June 2nd.
Being the revised 2020 to 20.
Meanwhile, in the House of Representatives, the same letters are read and lawmakers make several recommendations.
from what we have seen now, that we must improve on our saving culture. Also, we must reduce the recurrent expenditure.
They are proposing $32 less. Anything that will occasion that this parliament will approve a benchmark where Nigeria will sustain loss, we will not support it.
Honorable members,
The revised appropriation bill also scales second reading, and the president's request for a loan of $5.513 billion is referred to the Committee on Loans and Debt Management. Linda Akibe, Channels Television News.
Meanwhile, the opposition People's Democratic Party is kicking against the president's fresh loan request of $5.5 billion from global financial institutions. In a statement, the party says the volume of foreign loans being accumulated by the Buhari administration has placed the nation and its citizens on the international auction market. The statement signed by the PDP spokesperson, Mr. Kola Olobodiyan, notes that the government does not have an operable repayment plan for the loans, which could compromise Nigeria's fiscal integrity and open up the country for economic annexation by foreign lenders. According to the PDP, the government is exposing Nigerians to the risk of modern-day slavery by mortgaging their future to economic appropriation by foreign interests. Even as the PDP flays his loan requests, President Buhari is also asking developed countries and international financial institutions to cancel the debts of needy countries, especially in Africa, to enable them reverse the devastations of COVID-19. President Buhari renewed the appeal for debt cancellation at a high-level virtual meeting on financing for development in the COVID-19 era and beyond. The event was convened by the United Nations Secretary General and Jamaica and Canada.
Can you hear me? Hi, Ursula. Yes, I can hear you and see you. It's a virtual coming together of over 50 world leaders. This meeting, at the instance of the United Nations, shares a worry, the crippling impact of COVID-19 on their economies. On the table is a discussion on financing for development in the era of COVID-19 and beyond. President Buhari was clear on the need for debt cancellation.
There is an urgent need for weak and needy countries, especially those of Africa, to receive a fresh reprieve. This is a historical plague affecting every corner of the globe. In the circumstances, the response needed must be global, unconditional, comprehensive, and rapid. Debts must be forgiven and cancelled.
He told the gathering what steps his government is taking to mitigate the impact of the pandemic, which he describes as devastating.
For Nigeria, the shocks are multiple, including the sharp decline in international oil prices, which has negatively impacted revenues and growth, worsened external and domestic positions, and further increased banking sector vulnerabilities, resulting in enormous human and economic toll on the country.
The president believes standing together in true global solidarity is the only hope for humanity. At the end of the meeting, the Prime Ministers of Canada and Jamaica joined the United Nations Secretary General at briefing on the outcome of the meeting and how to proceed with sustainable financing in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank has expressed optimism that the gradual easing of the economy will improve economic activities and reduce the impacts of a possible recession in the country. The Apex Bank Governor, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, suggests quick fixes for the economy, including sustaining the disbursement of stimulus packages to households and critical sectors of the economy to cushion the effect of COVID-19.
Statistics from the International Monetary Fund estimates that global economic growth will contract from around 3% to 2.4% as a result of the pandemic. Nigeria, like other nations of the world, has been finding ways of stimulating the economy through diverse stimulus packages. Only recently, the central bank announced a 1 trillion naira stimulus package to the manufacturing, healthcare sector, as well as households, all in a bid to get the economy afloat. The Monetary Policy Committee meeting for May focused on how the pandemic has impacted the nation's economy and how gradual easing of the economy will go a long way to address a recession.
The positive but lower growth observed during the first quarter of 2020 is expected to dip slightly on the back of the combined monetary and fiscal stimulus by the monetary and fiscal authorities to ensure that growth at this time is supported to avoid a recession.
The committee also recommends the full implementation of the revised 2020 appropriation bill and the medium-term expenditure framework.
The MPC have praised the federal government's resolve to maintain the core, its spending plans for 2020, as this remained vital for the attainment of the much-needed economic recovery. It also applauded the government's efforts at revising the oil price benchmark downwards to reflect prevailing conditions. It reiterated the urgent need for government to improve tax collections through a gradual but purposeful diversification of the economy's revenue base. The committee also urged government to remain focused on the implementation of the revised 2020 to 2022 medium-term expenditure framework as the basis for sustainable fiscal policy.
In spite of all of these recommendations, however, the Monetary Policy Committee believes that the current downturn in the economy posed by the COVID-19 pandemic offers a great opportunity for economic diversification.
The Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, today chaired a meeting of the National Economic Council and members of the Economic Sustainability Committee. State governors and members of the committee interacted extensively on the forthcoming Economic Sustainability Plan. The virtual meeting, anchored from the presidential villa, was attended by state governors, including those of Ekiti, Kaduna, Ebonyi, Edo, Ogun, Jigawa, and Nasarawa states, representing all the 36 states of the Federation. According to the Vice President, it was a very robust engagement on the heels of the Council's meeting last week, which resolved that states would make input into the committee's work before final report is sent to the President. The federal government says it's targeting 1,000 jobs for rural dwellers across the 774 local government areas in the country through a special public work program. This comes from the Minister of State for Labor and Employment, Mr. Festus Keyamo, at a news conference in Abuja. According to him, the special scheme is part of the government's strategy to address unemployment and mitigate the effects of COVID-19 on the most vulnerable. Beneficiaries of this program will be deployed to maintain public infrastructure in their areas and will receive a 20,000 naira monthly stipend.
Sometime in October 2019, President Muhammad Buhari, GCFR, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, approved a pilot special public works program in the rural areas. And arising from the need and desire of the federal government to create massive jobs at the lowest rung of the economy, the pilot program, earlier approved by Mr. President, was designed to mitigate lack of job opportunities in the rural areas through a short-term engagement of 1,000 unemployed persons per local government area for a period of 3 months. Participants were to be paid an allowance of 20,000 naira monthly and were to be recruited largely from the pool of unemployed, unskilled persons, ordinarily residents in those rural areas. Now, you will recall that on Monday, the 6th of April 2020, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, in a press conference, announced the approval of Mr. President for the extension of this program to all 36 states and the FCT from October to December 2020 as a means of mitigating the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on the economy.
In part two, after the break, we'll open up discussion on the central bank's monetary policy rates. We'll be joined by the Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives, Mr. Bismarck Rawane. Stay with us. Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 live on Channels Television Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. Economy tops President Muhammadu Buhari's priorities, asks National Assembly to approve $5.5 billion external loan to finance 2020 budget. Effects of COVID-19 bites harder as President Muhammadu Buhari renews call for debt cancellation for African countries at United Nations high-level meeting. Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 cautions Nigerians against complacency as Kogi State government rejects test results of state index case. And coronavirus deaths in the U.S. passes over 100,000 in 4 months. Our website, channelstv.com, has more information on our top stories and others. Subscribe and watch Channels Television's live stream on YouTube and other social media platforms using your mobile device browser, or download the Channels TV app for Android and iOS devices from their respective stores. You can also watch us via your smart TV platforms on Apple TV, Android TV, Fire TV, and Roku. We continue our focus today on the Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the Central Bank of Nigeria, and the decisions were made there earlier today. We're joined on the news at 10 now by the CEO, Financial Derivatives Company, Mr. Bismarck Rawani. Thank you for joining us on the news at 10. And I'm sure that you have a lot of thoughts on the meeting today.
Yep.
You do. Okay, so let's begin with why you think the Central Bank of Nigeria took the decisions it did, suggesting quick fixes for the economy, including sustaining the disbursement of stimulus packages to households and critical sectors of the economy just to cushion the effects of COVID-19 amidst an abundance of other suggestions.
Point of correction, the Central Bank never said it was a quick fix. There's no silver bullet to this problem. Okay? Well, I don't think so. The Central Bank governor was very cautious in his words. Two things that come out of this. One, bringing down the monetary policy rate to 12.5% per annum. The last time we did this was in March 2019. As a signaling effect to the market that we're in a declining interest rate environment, one. Two, also a tacit acceptance that there's a limit to how much monetary policy can be used to solve fiscal problems. I think that's established. And why did they do that? They did this because, in any case, there's inflation targeting as a monetary policy framework. And also, almost all the central banks in the world, in Africa and advanced economies and other emerging markets, have actually brought down rates of interest to signal to people that they're in an accommodative stance. Some have even gone further to printing money, and the US is considering going to negative interest rates. That's established. However, we must understand that in our own case, we have a peculiar situation. We have rising inflation, high unemployment, and a slowing economy. So we have a stagflation situation right now, together with the threat of a recession. There's no doubt in my mind that in the second quarter, and the central bank alluded to it, that there will be a contraction, negative growth rate in Q2. We're already in that situation.
Yeah, but these conditions you mentioned are also evident in other countries too. So would this be for our own good, or this is just to keep up with international practices?
No, we are using this opportunity to address some of our fundamental problems while dealing with the operational problems that have arisen because of COVID. COVID had its health care threats. We have an economic problem, and also we have a cultural problem. So we have to solve all of these things together without leading to social unrest. We must take that into consideration. You see, if you look at, in our own case, the treasury bill rate is down to about 2 or 3%, while the inflation rate is about 12.34%. So there's a negative return. That is a fundamental problem, but temporarily, we will use this situation to allow for rates to go lower. However, there are some threats. The most important threat is that food inflation is at 15.03% and core inflation is at 9.89%. Right? So because of our high inflation situation, we can't afford to print money, and we can't afford to do certain things. So what is leading to this inflation that you're seeing? Three principal things. One, there was panic buying after the lockdown. There was also palliative buying because of companies buying a lot of things. And then there's also the pass-through effect of an exchange rate adjustment that took place during this process. Even though the demand for foreign exchange dropped because of the lockdown, but also there was this fear and anxiety as to what's going to happen in the markets. But fundamentally, we have a limping growth situation. We are going to be in negative growth in Q2. Most likely, there'll be a negative growth in Q3, which means that if you have 2 consecutive quarters, that is the definition of a recession. However, Nigeria is not peculiar. Almost all the countries in the world are going through this situation. As a matter of fact, the Chinese stopped announcing their target for growth because for certain reasons. But if you look at if you decompose the growth that was released, the GDP Q1 growth, of the 46 activities tracked by the Bureau of Statistics, only 9 outperformed the GDP growth rate, and 37 of them underperformed. So generally speaking, we had our own pre-existing macroeconomic condition in Nigeria before COVID, and the worst thing we needed was a COVID situation, and that's what happened.
And I think we discussed this even before. I think at the start of the epidemic in Nigeria, we talked about this. Let's talk some more about the impact that this would have on the ordinary Nigerian.
Yes, 2 things. One, we've talked about the economy that you are going to, and we'll come back to that. But for the ordinary Nigerian, there are 7 commodities that we looked at. You take the price in May last year, take the price in May this year. Of all of these commodities, the only one that has actually declined in price is tomatoes, which was 13,000 in May 2019, is now 12,000 in May 2020, right? And that was 7.6% reduction in price. All other items, rice, of course, is the big thing for the palliatives. So rice has gone up, locally produced rice as well. Pepper has gone up by almost 85%, from 7,000 naira a bag all the way to 13,000 naira a bag. Most important, the biggest culprit here was Gari, which went up from 6,250 a bag to 14,500 naira a bag. This will continue for some time. But what's going to happen is that because people don't have money, because everybody is affected by this, then naturally those prices begin to ease off, but not before some shocks. But in the end, to every Nigerian out there are 3 things to cheer. One is that the economic recovery is more likely to begin in the first quarter of 2021, assuming that oil prices stay above 35, which is the consensus opinion. There's a petrol price rebate, which brings in another 500 billion naira because the price of petrol is at 123.50 or 125 naira. Then there's the government palliatives, which comes to only 2.4% of GDP, is 3.5 trillion naira so far, plus others. But there are some things to fear. One is that because of excess liquidity, there's possibility that there'll be external pressures on the reserves and the exchange rate. There's also inflationary pressure in the short run, which I had mentioned earlier. And more than anything else, there's likely to be rising unemployment because of the lockdown. But in all cases, we are optimistic, cautiously optimistic, that one, it will be a U-curve, it won't be a V-curve recovery. It will go down, stay flat for a while, and then recover. And that kind of recovery is more stable than having, you can end up with a W, where you go up, go down, go up, and then come down again. That's a dangerous one. But the U-curve comes down, stays at the bottom, and more than anything else, the government is also using this opportunity to carry out some strategic fundamental changes to the structure of the economy. So if you put that together, then by 2021, it will be a better year than 2020.
And better to thrash out all those issues now.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rwani. Always a pleasure having you on the News at 10. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Let's head on now to Abuja, where Ibrahim Adra is standing by with more on the News at 10. Hi, Ibrahim.
Many thanks, Amarachi. Thank you for joining us in Abuja. The Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 is warning Nigerians against any form of complacency as it reviews further guidelines for the second phase of the ease of lockdown. At the daily news conference of the task force in Abuja, the secretary to the government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, notes that the ease of lockdown does not in any way mean that the threat of infection is over. He also criticizes hospitals for turning away non-COVID patients.
Honorable Ministers,
about a week ago, the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 announced an extension of the first phase of the ease of lockdown by 1 week. Less than 4 days to its expiration, the PTF warns against any form of complacency as it reviews guidelines for the second phase.
We are still not out of danger, and we should not deceive ourselves. We've not peaked yet, so there are more difficult days ahead. As government considers a balance between lives and livelihood, we will be informed by data, we will be informed by science. So I want to make this appeal that as we get to the end of the ease of the lockdown, the extension, we must be mindful of the steps that we are going to take.
The Ministry of Health informs the gathering about preparations to accommodate patients should there be an overflow.
In event of overflow, we can require hotels, school dormitories, etc. to be prepared for level 1, which is quarantine, level 2, isolation, which is of COVID positive patients with 0 or mild symptoms, so as to free hospital spaces to be dedicated to level 3, moderate to severe, and level 4, high dependency and intensive care units.
Meanwhile, the Director General of the NCDC explains why he is not deploying rapid diagnostic kits for COVID-19 testing.
Nothing will excite us more if there was a validated kit available. But at the moment, we don't know of any. Recent data out of the US showed that a certain kit that was invested in was right 50% of the time. So you can imagine if a test kit that you're using to say whether you have a disease or not is correct 50% of the time. So it means it's very hard for any physician to make a valid conclusion on those test kits as we know them at the moment.
From a singular COVID-19 case in Lagos State on February 27th this year, Nigeria has now reported over 8,700 confirmed cases of the virus in 34 states, as many health practitioners believe that several undetected cases exist as testing remains slow compared with other countries in the region.
When the news at 10 returns, we have more update on COVID-19. Plus, manufacturing PMI drops to 42.4 index points in May after 36 months of expansion due to slower growth in production and the global pandemic. That's on Business News. Join us again. Thank you for remaining with us. The Kogi State government has rejected the 2 COVID-19 positive cases announced by the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, NCDC, among the latest number of cases. According to the Commissioner for Information of the state, Kingsley Fanwo, claims that the NCDC did not work with the Kogi State team. The Kogi State government has referred to the process which led to the announcement of the 2 cases as fraudulent. The Kogi State Commissioner was speaking on our political program, Politics Today.
We are completely rejecting such declarations because they do not even conform to the protocol set by the NCDC itself. When you look at the history of the cases they declared, the patient was admitted at the Federal Medical Center in Lokoja for symptoms that are far from COVID-19 symptoms, but they were not attended to there, and the next thing was to bring them to the National Hospital in Abuja, and within a few hours, they were tested, and under 24 hours, the man was declared COVID-19 positive. It's fraudulent as far as we are concerned, and we are rejecting them in its entirety.
On the other hand, NCDC insists that due process was followed in the testing and announcement of results in the 2 confirmed cases of COVID-19 from Kogi State. At the briefing by the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 in Abuja, the Director General of the NCDC says the Kogi Index case was a referral from the Federal Medical Center in the state.
There were a series of questions on Kogi. My Honorable Minister was in touch with His Excellency over the last couple of days. I think everybody is working very hard to resolve this issue. There's actually no dilemma in the 2 cases. They followed absolutely normal practice. This were a patient that was referred from the Federal Medical Center to the National Hospital. This is a normal referral pathway when you have a case. The physicians in the National Hospital, I don't have any influence over the work that they do. They suspected COVID-19 based on the clinical symptoms of the patient. Did it ask for a test? The test came out positive. The individual lives in Kogi State. Everybody's in what we do in public health. Your public health response is based on where you live, because that's where your contacts are. So this is not controversial in any way. Standard practice was followed. Once the results came out, the state epidemiologist was informed that he has to do contact tracing around this patient. It is the state's responsibility to do that contact tracing. So we hope they do it. There's nothing actually controversial in any way about this. It's all standard, fairly standard practice. They asked whether we want to subject our test for validation. We're a public service organization. Everything we do is open to the Nigerian people. The last time there was some question about the test of the patient from Benue, we were asked to send it to NIMA. We sent it to NIMA. They got exactly the same result as we got.
Meanwhile, the Niger Delta Development Commission NDDC's office in Port Harcourt has been shut down for 2 weeks following the death of the Commission's Director of Finance and Administration, Mr. Basi Itangiwa, from COVID-19 complications. All members of staff of the NDDC, that is, have been asked to embark on 2 weeks self-isolation, while the Commission plans to carry out fumigation and decontamination exercise in all its offices and premises in the headquarters. The Commission is also suspending all its activities temporarily and further directs the head of security to ensure safety of the Commission. Meanwhile, NCDC officials have also buried another COVID-19 patient at the Port Harcourt Cemetery in Rivers State. He is identified as the council chairman of the Asari Toru local government area, Mr. Odiari Princewell. The burial was carried out under strict supervision of the COVID-19 task force in line with the NCDC protocols. And that's all from Abuja. Let's return to Amarachi in our Lagos studios.
Thanks, Ibrahim. President Muhammadu Buhari has commiserated with families of murdered victims of an attack by bandits in Sabon local government area of Sokoto State. The president's condolences conveyed in a statement from his special assistant on media and publicity, Mr. Garba Shehu, also praised for the quick recovery of those that sustained injuries. President Buhari also offers an assurance that the people will not be abandoned to their fate as the government is determined to totally crush the mass murderers. In other stories, the Bureau of Boards of Governors of the African Development Bank, AFDB, has clarified that the bank's president, Akinwumi Adesina, has not stepped aside from his position nor is being asked to stand down. In a statement signed by the chairperson of the board, Malam Nyali Kaba, the AFDB says it also has no governance or constitutional crisis as falsely portrayed in the media. The board, which has been handling matters arising from a whistleblowing complaint against the president of the bank, called for an independent investigation into corporate governance allegations against Mr. Adesina. Kaba, however, maintains that the Board of Governors is treating the developments with utmost seriousness, but calls on the public to allow due process in resolving the issues. Meanwhile, former President Olusegun Obasanjo has faulted the planned probe of Mr. Akinwumi Adesina by the United States Treasury after he was cleared of all allegations by the investigative body of the AFDB Board of Directors. Chief Obasanjo said in a letter to 12 former African presidents, including President Thabo Mbeki of South Africa and John Kufuor of Ghana, that Africa must stand up and not allow its institutions be unduly controlled by non-African countries. Chief Obasanjo's letter reads in part, instead of accepting the exoneration of the president of the bank, they, the U.S. Treasury, called for an independent investigation. This is outside of the rules, laws, procedures, and governance systems of the bank. The U.S. Treasury Secretary disparaged the bank and ridiculed the entire governance system of the bank, which has been in place since 1964. If we do not rise up and defend the African Development Bank, this might mean the end of the AFDB, as its governance will be hijacked away from Africa. Chief Obasanjo is, however, proposing that the former leaders collectively issue a press statement to support the laid-down procedures embarked upon to evaluate the allegations against Mr. Adesina and recommend that the Board of Directors and Ethics Committee of the bank firmly stand by their processes and outcome. Ahead of the governorship election in Edo State, a coalition of women groups from the state is backing Governor Godwin Obaseki for another 4 years in office. As an expression of their support, the group says it's ready to purchase the All Progressives Congress APC nomination form for him. A spokesperson for the Edo State Market Women Association, Mrs. Blackie Ogiame, said the governor has accomplished a lot to deserve another term.
The Market Women Association are here for a meeting at the Jiso Market in Benin City, the Edo State capital. The lock shops suggest that their agenda is not about buying and selling. The women are here to discuss the forthcoming governorship election in Edo State. They have made up their minds to support the incumbent governor, Mr. Godwin Obaseki, who is seeking another 4 years in office.
We are ready to support him, and for another 4 years, we will contribute our 10 naira to buy him ticket so that we complete
the market women are not the only ones voting for Governor Godwin Obaseki. Teachers from the Edo Basic Education Sector Transformation, also known as Edo Best, send their message in this Where We Head drill. The activities of the women bodies continue at the Edo State Government House. Here, the body of professional women in the state also agree on Mr. Godwin Obaseki as their preferred candidate in the coming polls.
His Excellency, Mr. Godwin Nogegase Obaseki, and his deputy, Comrade Philip Shaibu, as the next governor come November in the state.
The last gathering for the women is at the APC Secretariat. The gathering is made up of political appointees. They join the other women groups to pledge support for Governor Godwin Obaseki.
I remember in this state before, if they appoint 3 women, they will say they have appointed women. Add one more to it, they say no, women will be too much. Now, one governor has come and he has appointed over 400 women since the inception of this government.
The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, has released the timetable for the 2020 governorship election in Edo State. The party primaries is slated for June the 22nd, and the election will hold on September 19, 2020.
It's time for business news. Here's Kayode Okikiolu.
Well, thank you, Amarachi, and you're welcome to Business News. We begin with Nigeria's Purchase and Managers Index, which fell to a lower reading of 42.4 in May, and that's compared to 51.1 in April. That's according to the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, while briefing on the outcome of the MPC decisions in Abuja earlier today. Mr. Emefiele attributes the decline in the PMI to the lockdown which was imposed globally to curtail the spread of COVID-19.
The decline in manufacturing PMI was significant following 36 consecutive months of expansion, while the non-manufacturing PMI contracted for the second quarter consecutive month. The contraction in the manufacturing and non-manufacturing purchasing managers index was attributed to slower growth in production, new orders, employment level, raw materials and input prices. The employment level index for the manufacturing and non-manufacturing PMIs also contracted further to 25.5 and 32.0 index points respectively in May 2020.
And over to the stock market, where the long run of successive gains in previous local equities trading were halted by profit taking on Thursday as investors lose 29 billion naira, with the all-share index dipping by 0.22%. Bisi Adebayo gives us more trading figures.
Hello and welcome to the Stock Market Report. Profit taking on banking stocks pushed the all-share index of the Nigerian Stock Exchange down by 0.22%, and that's on the day the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank reduced the MPR by 100 basis points to 12.5%. The banking sector tumbled 2.79%, and that was due to declines recorded by Tier 1 lenders like Ecobank, UBA, and GT Bank, as well as FBNH. The oil and gas index also took a nosedive of 0.63%, and that was caused by a 5.71% decline in the share price of Owando. Kitex led 18 other gainers for the session, which also includes May and Baker, while Tier 1 lender Ecobank Transnational Incorporated topped the decliners list with close to 10%. Total volume of transactions for the day came in at 348.21 million shares, and that was largely driven by the financial services sector, talking about FBN Holdings, Access Bank, and Zenith Bank. And that's it on the Stock Market Reports. I am Bisi Adebayo.
Thank you for watching Business News Tonight. I'm Kayode Okikiolu. The news at 10 continues with Amarachi.
Thanks, Kayode. Still ahead on the news at 10, coronavirus deaths in U.S. passes over 100,000 in 4 months. We have this some more from our studio in London and around the world in 5. Welcome back to the news at 10. U.S. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order targeting social media companies. This comes after Twitter called 2 of his tweets potentially misleading. CNN reports that ahead of signing the order, President Trump said the move was to defend free speech from one of the gravest dangers it has faced in American history. The executive order seeks to curtail the power of large social media platforms by reinterpreting a critical 1996 law that shields websites and tech companies from lawsuits. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for debt relief to be offered to all developing and middle-income countries amid the coronavirus pandemic, urging the International Monetary Fund to consider boosting global liquidity by issuing a new allocation of its special drawing rights currency. The world's developing economies, already struggling with a rapidly growing debt burden, must now confront a record global downturn, plummeting prices for their oil and commodities exports and weakening local currencies. The oil price drop has also hit some middle-income countries particularly hard. Here's Simon Pusey with more international news in Around the World in 5.
Good evening and welcome to the Channel Studios here in London for your international news around the world in 5. China's parliament has backed a new security law for Hong Kong. The new bill would make it a crime to undermine China's authority in the city. In recent days, the bill has caused deep concern among those who say it could end Hong Kong's unique status. China says the legislation will be aimed at tackling secession, subversion, terrorism and foreign interference in the city. Scuffles have broken out in Hong Kong's legislature when discussing a different proposed law which would make it a crime to disrespect the Chinese national anthem. Hundreds of people were arrested in protests over that and the security law. According to the protesters, sanctions and other economic consequences should be put in place to pressure Beijing to withdraw the new law. Protests continue in Minneapolis in the United States, 2 days after the death of 46-year-old African-American George Floyd, who died in hospital after a white police officer knelt on his neck during an arrest. The outpouring rage over the death of the unarmed black man at the hands of the police culminated in explosions and blazes of fire during the night. This happened after 2 days of demonstrations accompanied by widespread acts of looting and vandalism in the city. Hundreds of protesters, many with faces covered, have been thronging the streets around where Floyd had been arrested, chanting "No justice, no peace."
No justice, no peace!
The policeman and 3 fellow officers who participated in Floyd's arrest were dismissed from the police department. The FBI has opened an investigation into the incident. The US has passed 100,000 deaths in the coronavirus outbreak in less than 4 months. It means America has seen more fatalities than any other country, while its 1.69 million confirmed infections account for about 30% of the worldwide total. The US death toll now stands at 100,276. That's according to Johns Hopkins University in Maryland, which has been tracking the pandemic. It means that around as many Americans have died from COVID-19 than from the Korea, Vietnam, Iraq and Afghanistan wars combined. Hundreds of workers have burned tyres and set up blockades around Nissan's Barcelona plant after the company announced the plant would shut from December. The closure would be part of a global restructuring plan of the car maker to slash costs after the economic crisis generated by the pandemic. Nissan's decision comes at a time when unemployment is spiking in Spain and a steep recession is looming. The Barcelona plant and the nearby facilities employ 3,000 workers, and the closures could indirectly affect up to 25,000 jobs. That's according to local unions. About 400 people have escaped from a coronavirus quarantine center in Malawi's second largest city, Blantyre, after complaining about its poor state. Local media have reported that the escapees were quarantined on arrival from South Africa and were yet to be tested for the virus. They had complained that the stadium, which was turned into a quarantine center, lacked water, toilets and food. The government has not commented on the escapes. Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta has revealed how his son violated a government dusk-to-dawn curfew order issued to prevent the spread of the virus. He said one of his 2 sons, whom he did not identify, recently went out to party at night in the coastal city of Mombasa, an epicenter of infections in the country. Social gatherings are prohibited in the East African country. Spacex has been forced by poor weather conditions to cancel a planned launch of 2 Americans into orbit from Florida.
Launch abort has started.
The mission would have marked the first spaceflight of NASA astronauts from US soil in 9 years. The countdown was halted less than 17 minutes before the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket was due to lift off from the Kennedy Space Center. The next launch window is set for Saturday afternoon, when SpaceX will make a second attempt to send the astronauts into orbit. And finally, in the UK, the Duchess of Cornwall has joined the New Zealand film director Taika David Cohen for the latest instalment of his charity reading of Roald Dahl's James and the Giant Peach. According to a press release, the Duchess of Cornwall is taking on her first ever character role. Camilla joins a cast of Hollywood stars who are all taking part via video link from their living rooms in the coronavirus lockdown charity reading. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel Studios in Lagos.
Welcome to Sports News. The Confederation of African Football have approved the immediate distribution of financial grants to member associations to support the management of football at the domestic levels hugely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The continent's governing body said a total of $10.8 million will be transferred to the 54 member associations as part of a relief plan to ease financial responsibilities. The Premier League season will resume on Wednesday, June the 17th, with Aston Villa at home to Sheffield United and Manchester City hosting Arsenal. The two matches are in the games in hand that'll take all the 20 clubs up to 29 matches and have huge ramifications at both ends of the table. Another Premier League game will be played on Friday, June the 19th, but the full round of fixtures will start on Saturday, June the 20th, with matches staggered across the weekend. Italy's Sports Minister Vincenzo Spadafora has confirmed that the Serie A will restart on June the 20th after a 3-month suspension owing to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Italian top flight was suspended on March the 9th as part of a nationwide lockdown to curb the coronavirus spread. Spadafora says Serie A matches will quarantine the whole squad for 14 days with a positive test, but is open to changes if the pandemic in Italy eases. That's sports news. Back to Amarati.
Thanks, Olumide. And news just in says China has evacuated 325 of its citizens from Nigeria. The Air Peace flight was scheduled to depart from Nigeria at 5 minutes past 10. The plane is taking them to Shanghai. And the main news again. The nation's economy today topped President Muhammadu Buhari's priorities as he asked the National Assembly to approve a $5.5 billion external loan to finance the 2020 budget. Also today, the Central Bank Monetary Policy reduced the monetary policy rate to 12.5% from 13.5%. That's it on the news at 10 tonight. Thank you for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Good night.